You're supposed to start at the beginning, but it is the present now, and I am at the twilight of my years. I'm 81 years old, and I have had a good life. Sometimes not so good, but mostly. I love life and enjoy looking and being in this world. It gives me great pleasure. I also love people, and I feel fortunate that I have a wonderful family and friends. I am an up person, and if you give off good vibes, you get good vibes back. So I have gotten really great feedback from those I love and those I'm acquainted with. My family and my friends have always given me love and tell me nice things that pleases me. So again, life has mostly been good. There is an expression that life is a play in 3 acts: infancy, middle years, and age. I am in the 3rd act. I'm still feeling good, even though I have a disease which may cut my years left short, but I found a wonderful man built to spend the rest of my life with. I'm also hoping that, even though I am ill, that I will have many more years left to share with all those that I love, because I really love life very much, and I like to be here as long as possible. Well, let's begin. My name is Esther Dorothy Willens. My mother named me, oh my goodness, my name is Esther Dorothy Lipschultz. Willens is my married name. My name is Esther Dorothy Lipschultz. My mother named me Esther Dorothy after an aunt who died. In the Jewish religion, they name after aunts. They name after the dead. Her sister Rose, her older sister, had a daughter before me, and named her after the same aunt, and she named her Elaine Doris. So my mother decided, since they call Elaine Doris Elaine, they'll call me by the second name, Dorothy. And that's how I became Dorothy for the rest of my life, even though my birth certificate and my passport says Esther Dorothy. My mother came from a family of 9 children. Her mother and her father came from Russia. My grandma and grandpa, my grandfather Markel and my grandmother Frida lived in Russia. My grandfather Markel had been married and had 2 children, and had 2 boys, the name of Hank and Eddie. That's my Uncle Hank, my Uncle Eddie. Then his wife died, and he married my grandmother Frida. And before they came to the United States, they had a daughter, Rose. They came to the United States with Rose and left the 2 boys behind with relatives. When they arrived here, after a while, my grandmother Frida was a really wonderful woman, and she said to her husband, "You must bring those boys over here." And so that's what happened. The 2 boys came over there, and the family lived in a 4-story house in Brooklyn, 501 Willoughby Avenue. I think it's 501, but it's definitely Willoughby Avenue. My grandmother's brother, Sidney Schiff, brought them over from Europe, and he had a business here. He had the body forms that women used to use for sewing. At that time, people made their own clothes, and so he used that, and he did very well. After a while, he made an adjustable form, and he did really well, and he was a wealthy man. I say this because my grandfather was a rabbi when he came here, but he felt that they didn't respect rabbis the way they should in this country, and so he didn't want to continue to be a rabbi, and Sidney Schiff set him up in business, which was M. Goldsmith window fixtures, and all the family, all the boys went into that business. Now, the family was well educated. They went to school, and I know my Uncle Eddie and my Uncle Hank loved the opera. I always remember the story how they would stand in the back, and they were called the clappers, and they were allowed to come in if they clapped, and they'd stand in the back and they watched the opera. I said my mother had brothers and sisters. So the oldest one was Uncle Hank, and then there was Eddie. Then came Rose, then my Uncle George and my mom Dinah, Lily, my Uncle Murray, my Uncle Joey, and my Aunt Deli. That was the family who lived in Willoughby Avenue. My father came from a family of 8 brothers and sisters. They also came from Europe. They came from, I think it was I don't remember, but it was something like Poland and Russia. And they came to the United States. And they settled on the east side of New York, the East New York. And it was a poor section, and they were very poor people. And my father told me lots of stories about the family. And the family, they had 8. There was my Uncle Archie, my Uncle Manny, Phil, Julius, that's my father, my Uncle Charlie. My Uncle Al died when he was 32, and I never met him. He had a heart attack. My Aunt Ida and my Aunt Florence. My father told me a funny story, that their name was Lipschitz, and my grandfather went to court to change the name because everyone used to make fun of the kids and call them Shitzy. So he changed it to Lipschultz. Now, I always thought that was funny because they were so poor they didn't have money to go to court. So the name must have been Lipschultz all the time, and that's just a story he told. So, and he used to tell stories of how on the Lower East Side in New York there was construction and there were pipes, and how they rolled down the streets with pipes and they played in the streets. My father left elementary school at grade 8. And even though he wasn't well educated, he was a very smart man. He used to help my sisters and I with our homework, and he could do the math, even if it wasn't the new math. He was really very smart. And he was a really great man. They were all women, and he would just sit, and he did the World Telegram, which was a very, very good newspaper in New York, better than the New York Times. And he would do the Sunday crossword puzzle, and that was the hardest puzzle of any newspaper. So he was very smart. He also was a very good artist, and he had when he first when my mother and father got married, he had a garage, and the book with his accounts we still have, and he would draw in the account book, and we have all those pictures of his drawings, and they're really very good. And so that's just about what I have left of my father. My father died when I was 16, and he died when he was 52. So I knew him, but when you get older, you sort of get to know your parents even better. When you're a child, all you do is listen, and you're sort of afraid of them. So my father had this this station or garage, and eventually he sold it. And we even had a car. I heard, that's only what I was told, that we had a car, and but then he sold it when we moved, and he also sold the business. And he used to go into M. Goldsmith Company, my mother's family's company. He would sit and tinker around until he was, until he got another job. Well, they asked him if he wanted a job, so he went ahead and he said yes, and they put him out as a salesman. He did very well. He made a lot of money. In fact, he made more than the brothers, so they got upset. And he said, I don't care, so I won't go out. I don't care what I do. So he worked in the factory for the rest of his life. And he would tinker around, and he made little metal things that we have, like a bell and certain things like that we have that my father made. I don't remember much since before I was 5 years old, only what I have been told. I lived at Madison Street for 1 year when I was 1 year old in Brooklyn. Then my family, Renee, my mother and father, went to live at 593 Rutland Road. That was a two-family house, and we had the bottom apartment. And it was a really great street because across the street from us were no houses. It was a hospital, and there was just a big black wrought iron fence. And you could play on the street there because there were no houses, and we were allowed to play and use that. There was a sidewalk and grass on either side, and that's where we played potsy and we do, different things. And it was a play street, so we were also allowed to roller skate in the street and ride our bikes and play games and things like that. The boys used to play stickball in the street, and I would play. There were alleys, because you go in between. There were two houses and then an alley, two houses and an alley, and if you drive back all the way through the alley, there was a garage in the back, but hardly anyone had cars there, so they would rent them out to people. But there were the alley had led to the houses, so that was like the cellar door, and that would be our bases. So we played punch ball. We played punch ball in the alleys. We also played stoop ball. We had steps going up to the porch, and we throw the ball, and it would have to bounce on the street. And anyway, we played stoop ball. We played jacks. We played with all kinds of games. We were outside all the time. I don't remember anything, as I said before, I was 5, but I do remember Rutland Road. I remember what it looked like. I remember my friends. There were a whole group of girlfriends, but I always remember that I was very insecure, and I was always afraid nobody would ask me to be with them and to play with them. And that's the kind of a person I was. I wasn't an aggressive person, and I just always felt I didn't want to be left out. That's how I felt. And my mom, her family lived close by, all around Brooklyn, all around where we are. So I got to see my mother's family often. We would go on Sundays to see my grandmother and grandfather all the time. And of course, Jewish holidays we spent with my mother's family, like Passover and other things. So, but my father's family, we also knew, and we played with the cousins, and we knew them. They mostly lived in Brooklyn, but some lived at other places. Like my Aunt Ida lived in New Jersey, and my favorite cousins, the 4 boys, my Uncle Phil's 4 boys, we loved them, lived in Newark, and it took a long time to get there, so we would have to take a ferry from Brooklyn to New Jersey and stay for the weekend. And my father would take the 3 sisters over there, and they'd pull the mattresses off, and we'd sleep on box springs and mattresses, and we'd stay for the weekend, and we just had so much fun with the boys. We just loved them, and we loved my Uncle Phil. My Uncle Phil had a car accident, so he was not able to work, and he was in a wheelchair all the time, and he used to do jigsaw puzzles, and I think that's why my family likes to do that too. we do puzzles, and we like doing puzzles. We would sit and help him do the puzzles, and he thought he was very funny. I didn't think it was funny. He would say, look up at the ceiling, and if he had coffee in his mouth, you look up at the ceiling. He'd say, look at that, and he'd spit in your face the coffee. I didn't think that was very funny, but, that's what I remember that about him. But I never got hurt or anything because I loved my Uncle Phil. As I said, I don't remember anything before I was 15. 5. Excuse me, I always say the wrong thing. Before I was 5 years old. That's when I had my tonsils taken out. And I remember I could still see the crib that they put me in. My mother would come to visit, and I remember when they put me under, I could still feel the hands on my arms and my legs, and they put that gas mask over you to put you to sleep, and it's like you're dying, and you get all dizzy, and your head goes in a circle. But I woke up and I was fine. My throat hurt me, and you could have ice cream, so that was good. And when I went home, the thing that I remember is my Aunt Rose came and gave me a present while I was in bed, and it was a grocery store, and I loved that. I thought it was wonderful, and it was a great toy for me. The other thing I remember is when I was taken to school at 5 years old. And I remember clinging to my mother while she was putting me in registration, and I remember. And I remember I was wearing a red and blue plaid coat with leggings, and so those were two traumatic things for me. So that's the first thing I do remember. I used to sleep in a room with my sister Barbara, and my sister Renee had a small room to herself. There were 2 little rooms in the back and a bathroom, and my mother slept in the front in a sun parlor with my dad, and the place that was supposed to be the dining room was the living room, and then we had a big breakfast room right off a little kitchen where we had an ice box. I remember we had an ice box, and the iceman used to come and deliver the ice, and in the wintertime my mom would have a box out on the window, and you were able to put things out there because it was so cold, like milk and stuff like that. Also, they delivered milk to the door. We would have milk that the cream came to the top, so if you wanted cream in some things, which was really good and rich, you could have that. My mom was always home. She was always cooking and cleaning, and we always ate everything together, all our meals. And one of the things that I liked and I remember was Sunday breakfast with my father. I would go to the store because even though I was like maybe 7 years old, you could go out by yourself at that time, and all the stores were at the corner of the street. You had the corner candy store, which was also a luncheonette. You had the produce store, you had the butcher, you had the fish store. You had all little stores where you could pick up all your food. So I would go and buy onion rolls on Sunday and come home, and with my father, I remember he'd make wheatina, and we'd have wheatina and onion rolls for breakfast, and I thought that was great. It's one of the nice things that I remember, that I spent time with my father, because we didn't really spend too much time with our parents. We played with our friends, and we did our homework. But I remember my sister Renee would sit in the hallway between the 2 bedrooms, and she would read to us, to Barbara and myself. And I do remember that. That's also a not very pleasant memory for me. Barbara and I used to fight a lot. I'm not sure why, but maybe because I was jealous that she was the baby. I don't know, but I used to fight with her a lot, and I hit her a lot. And she'd cry to my mother, and my mother would yell at her instead of me. So I don't know why later on in years Barbara and I got along fine, but we let it go because it was something in the past. And so we got along fine. And but when we were young, I really was very rotten to her, and I also had a terrible temper. I guess maybe I wanted attention, and I'd sit on the floor and I'd pound my hands and I'd go screech and go pound, and Renee would be frightened and she'd be afraid, and that something was going to happen, but I did do that, and maybe it was a good thing because I let out all the anger, and I wasn't like that when I grew up. But I was an insecure young lady, and I guess I was looking for attention. After we lived we had a neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Becker, who had two boys, and Sidney, and I can't remember the other name, and we played with them besides the girls on the block. There were lots of children, and one other thing I remember about my mom is a few blocks away was a hospital called the Incurables. At that time they called handicapped people, that's what they called them, Incurables. And my mom used to go over sometimes during the week, and she would feed them, and because she was a very good charitable person. And I never really did tell you about my mom's house. Being charitable reminds me of my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. The house on Willoughby Avenue had 4 stories. The second story, my Bubby and Zadie lived there, and they had a little tiny apartment, just a little kitchen and a room. My grandmother, great-grandmother, she died when they say at 98, but she could have been over 100. But she was a very charitable person, and she would take food from the house, because at that point there was plenty of food for us, and things were going good for that family. And she would bring it to poor people and people who were hungry and starving. And they were very religious people. They were Orthodox Jews, and they kept the Sabbath. And the door was always open on Saturday, and people were welcome to come in, and they would eat. My grandma would feed them, they'd come and they'd pray with my grandfather too. And this is what I was told. Naturally, I don't remember what happened. I was too young. And so they were a very charitable family. And as far as my aunts and uncles, we were close, we used to play, and I used to play with my cousins a lot. And in fact, I'm still close. I still am in touch with some of my cousins, which is really very nice. My cousin Elaine and Flossie, and my cousin Joan. I get to see them, and sometimes Joan's brother, who lives near me, my cousin Donald, who was the oldest one and still alive. We've had very good long life, and my mother's family, they all died over the age of 88. My father's side of the family, not so good. They all died pretty young. I'm hoping to follow in my mother's footsteps, but we'll see.